Welcome to This is Supercritical, a podcast where experience, equity, and expertise converge to examine current trends in the cannabis industry. You can find all of our podcasts on your favorite streaming service and at supercritical.agency, your one-stop destination for all things cannabis. Hello, I'm Kerry Jordan, co-founder of Supercritical. Joining us on today's episode is Shanel Lindsay, founder and CEO of Ardent Life, an award-winning global hardware company that develops and commercializes proprietary consumer devices. Shanel, we're so grateful for you to join us today.
Hi, Kerry. I'm so glad to be here. It's always great to talk with you.
I know, it's so great to see you again. And I've gotten to know you over the past 4 years, and your life story and Ardent's origin story are just so captivating. I know our listeners would love to hear more about how you navigated from being a practicing attorney to the founder of a cannabis device company. So maybe you could start with the day you turned right on red and share with us how that experience led to where you are today.
Yes. So that day in my life was absolutely the day that my legal background and my cannabis background came into collision, but it was not the way that I had hoped or, expected. And so this was back about 15 years ago now. And I was a young lawyer. I was practicing for about 2 years at that point, and I really loved it. The future was incredibly bright. I was getting awards as a rising star at my firm, and I was also a young mom at that time. My son was about 8 years old, and so I was feeling really good about being past that first. I was getting in the groove of my motherhood as well, and so things were like life was good at that point. On my son's side, though, after my son was born, I had an ovarian cyst. And that led me to utilizing cannabis for medical purposes in order to deal with my pain and inflammation from this cyst. And it was actually something I managed for 20 years with the help of cannabis without any pharmaceuticals. And so after one day I was driving in the summertime on the way to work, and I got pulled over. I took a right on a red, like you mentioned, in Massachusetts. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. I didn't see the sign that day and took a right on a red and was pulled over. Just a plain traffic stop. And that transformed into one of the scariest days of my life because the police officer saw a little bit of cannabis in my car, and instead of just giving me a ticket, actually arrested me, impounded my car, and
Oh my God.
yeah, so it was a very
So scary.
scary and shocking day, primarily because I was thinking, what is going to happen to my future? I would have at that point been fired from my job as an attorney. I was really worried about my son as well. And even more so, Carrie, I was then getting arrested for the cannabis I had on the side of the road. I was actually growing cannabis in my spare bedroom. So I was very worried about police going, raiding my house, and really be facing jail time, for that. So and at that point, not that I was living in a little bit of a bubble, but we had decriminalization in Massachusetts, and from a legal perspective, I knew not to have a certain amount on me when I was out, and I had less than that amount. And so it was a very eye-opening for me, that experience that decriminalization is not legalization. And, it's
Right.
very, very important for there to be a strong legal framework for people to have and utilize cannabis for medical and adult use reasons, and that nobody should be looking at, losing their job or losing their livelihood or children or family for something that they could, this type of substance. So that was a very formative day for me at the end. But it was one of those things where, one of the worst things that happens to you turns into one of the best opportunities
Hmm.
in your life. And looking back on it, that day it didn't seem like I was able to, talk myself out of the arrest and avoid being, pulled into the same court that I represented clients and being arraigned there, and, the public humiliation of that, and obviously the domino effect that
So
would have
nuts.
had, on my career. But that really did plant a seed for me when it came to the hypocrisy in the cannabis law and the fact that none of us were really free until, and especially certain groups of people that still continue to be targeted even after things like decriminalization come on board.
So it's such a shocking story. I can't even imagine the range of emotions that you must have gone through on that day, and especially just on your way to work, and things just complete opposite direction of where you thought you might be going that day. But so knowing that or having that experience and being a single mom, being a Black woman, being an attorney, how did all of that influence the mission and vision for your company? So what did you do in the days after that to get Ardent going?
Yes, and so
Had you
Yeah, so there really was at that point, it started a series of events that really set me up to then become this CEO and entrepreneur in the cannabis space. And so when I went home that night, really I just cried quite a bit because not over the arrest necessarily, that was traumatic and I did cry when that happened, but also because I made a decision that night to cut down the plants that I had in my bedroom. Because I knew and I was worried that if the police came back or something like that, then I would be really in trouble. And so over that next week or so, I made that decision to cut those plants down. And really what happened at that point is that I lost my supply of my own personal medicine. And so that was very difficult for me because I was using the cannabis I was growing in order to make my suppositories and edibles and topicals and all of the things that I was using for my
Mhm.
ovarian cyst. And so really what it did is it pushed me back to buying weed from the street. And that was very difficult for me because it was expensive. I had less product to work with. And I started feeling very uneasy about what I was buying because, again, it wasn't something that I had the benefit of tending to and making sure that it was a good product. And so that really started. And I also had to become very undercover about my activities, meaning that I didn't want my neighbors to be smelling what was happening because of my arrest. And so all of these
Mhm.
issues around how to make cannabis products and how to make them efficiently with very little product started to be top of mind for me. And so about a decade went by, or about 7 years went by, where I was doing that, but also becoming an attorney. I mean, increasing my, practice and getting more expertise as an attorney. And when medical marijuana came to Massachusetts, there was a laboratory that opened up and it was only about a half hour away from my house. And I saw when medical marijuana was on the horizon, I thought, wow, I've been doing this for about a decade now, been treating my own medical symptoms. I really could educate and teach people about how to make edibles and topicals. But there was something that was standing in the way, which was this lack of education and understanding, even from me who had been doing it for 10 years, about what the dosing was in my final products. Whether or not I had done this activation process, people, if they start to make edibles or topicals, they come across this concept of decarboxylation, which means activating the THC and all the cannabinoids that are in the plant are really locked away, and you need to activate them through a specific process. And so I knew about this process, but I didn't have the data. And as an attorney, I need to have the evidence. I need to have the data in order to be confident in being able to teach people. So I went to the lab. And I remember this is a brand new lab and I was the fourth client of this laboratory. All the other clients were, dispensaries or, cultivators and, one caregiver. And so I went in.
And let me ask, was it like an innovation
No,
lab
it was
where you
actually
could
a
just go in
cannabis
and try things, or what,
laboratory. Yeah. So if it was,
like a testing
yes, it
lab?
was a cannabis testing lab.
Okay.
And that was really where the mystery lie with with the products, which is how do we know if we're doing this activation and decarboxylation right? And there was a lot of information online, or not a lot, but enough where if you were looking for it, but it was very conflicting information about how to make these products. So I was making it in different ways that worked for me. But when it came down to actually educating and telling people how to do this the exact right way, I wanted that information. So I went to the cannabis lab and brought my medicine that I had activated in the oven, in the toaster oven, basically all the different ways that I saw that people were, saying that you should do it. I went and I tested it, including my method that I had been doing, for 10 years. So what really shocked me was when the testing came back showing that every single method, including the one that I was using, was only activating to about 40% of the available THC in the plant.
Interesting. So a lot of waste there.
Ton,
You got to figure
a
out.
ton of waste.
Wow.
And it really started to make sense because that's why when people were making edibles or topicals, they were using like even somebody making cookies, they might even put a whole ounce in the oven. That's like,
Hmm.
anywhere from $200 to $400 worth of flour, and if they're not doing it right, and sometimes some of the testing was, coming back at 0% activated or all burnt off, right? So, I saw that it was a very delicate process and that the oven and the toaster oven, no matter how much we tested them on different things, they were never actually getting to a good activation. But what I started to do it is test in the lab where we would do it in the autoclave of the laboratory. And in that situation, we were able to get full activation up to 97%. But it was a different type of heating that existed than like your oven or your toaster oven. And that was really
What was the
well, the
difference?
difference was that it was really like an autoclave. So there was heating wrapped all the way around, and it was this very
Okay.
small bit of heating that was happening kind of like almost in a test tube that was completely surrounded by a heating element, right? And so I thought, well, if I could replicate that in a household device and basically take the laboratory grade process and transform that into a tabletop unit, then people could be able to get this type of efficiency in their own home. And that's when Ardent was born. This concept of taking and transforming what happens in the lab for that individual, cannabis consumer and patient. And that is what led to me developing the devices, which you see here, which really do act just like I said,
Amazing.
as this autoclave with multiple sensors. Obviously, had to do, incorporate other technology in order to get that same scenario that we got in the laboratory. And so this is 3 versions in on the device now, and obviously innovation is very important to staying on and ahead in the market when it comes to technology. But it was a very proud moment for me to be able to say, okay, wow, I really investigated something that was important to me, found a solution for that, and found a way to bring it to other people to help them as well.
So you have this amazing idea, this insight of how to enable consumers to make their own products and to do so at a much more cost-effective way and at price points that can help them manage their medicine and what they're spending on their wellness. So how do you go from having that idea to setting up an entire supply chain and actually producing this device and then selling it online and direct to consumer? Like there's just so much going on in this process. How did you set the roadmap?
Well, it was definitely a lot of trial and error back then because you can imagine I was a pretty smart cookie, right? This attorney who's doing these things, but I'd never run a business before, never brought a product to market. And honestly, now when I look back on it, I'm pretty amazed of the fact that it all came together as it did, because obviously there's a lot of luck involved and there's also a lot of, strategy. So for somebody going in and knowing nothing, for me, what I was able to do was, okay, think of the pieces that I need in order to create this. And I really didn't have much funding at all at that point. It was money that I started Ardent with money that I made from being an attorney representing some clients, getting some settlements in, and then using that money for the first, bit of
Hmm.
time, and the time that developing this was taking away from my practice, right? Because it's not just the money of, creating the device, it's also your time and energy that's taken away from whatever else you're doing in order to start a venture like this. And so I went to a lot of biotech conferences, actual product conferences. So I was able to look and find pieces like a silicone heater and sensors and vendors
Okay.
that would be able to provide these things. So first I identified and sketched out the pieces that I thought I would need to create this, and then started getting counsel from different vendors about how I could potentially construct it. I worked with contractors overseas. That was something I really utilized early on because the cost factor. So, for example, an engineer from Ukraine that could help me build out the algorithm, which I knew. So there are things that I brought to the table that I already knew how they needed to be constructed, and so just to be able to bring different professionals on that had the expertise to build different pieces of this. And then, frankly, I prayed like hell, Kerry, because I ordered all these different pieces from all these different places and literally soldered the first 100 units together in my living room. And everything put together and worked. We had designed the circuit board and all the different pieces to go. So it was very difficult because I was working with different people and different vendors, and I was kind of the project managing all of it and really hoping
Mhm.
that everything went well. And honestly, the first day when everything came and we put it in and we were all set up with the cameras for it to work, it did not work.
Oh, no.
And I looked back and I could not even crack a smile that day for the camera to pretend. But there was one thing in the circuit board that was put on, oriented the wrong way so that when we put the button in, it didn't work, but then it got resolved, right? So those first 100 units I went, and it was a very straightforward and kind of guerrilla marketing from the beginning. Put up a website, use that SEO from the website, but also just started talking to patient groups. I was out, and one of the first presentations I did was actually at the same laboratory that I did my research. The owner of the lab said, "Hey, we're having this medical marijuana meetup group," and it had a lot of folks that were very active in either new dispensaries and other things like that. And I got to present there. And frankly, not only did I meet folks that I've done a lot of business with, but I also met, my dispensary partners there, folks that I've done other business with, right? So it started to be just being very active in the community, which, that I was serving, and starting to show that value through the product. And once I was able to show people lab testing of how well this product worked for them and started getting the first users on board, then it really started to be for many years like a word of mouth company where people would tell their family and friends, or they would, caregivers started picking up the device, and it really transformed the way that they were able to interact with the plant. And so we got a lot of good, earned media and general press from just how great the technology was.
Mhm. I know Sparky and his wife love it. They use the Ardent all the time in their cooking and just for daily use, and they absolutely love it. So you and I first met through an accelerator program when you were growing and scaling the company. And at that time, you were thinking about doing some fundraising for the business so that you could continue to expand. And I'm curious to know, since then to where you are today, what that process has been like for you. Because I know it is extremely challenging, especially for cannabis related businesses, to raise capital, but it's also very difficult for women, for female founders to raise capital, and even more so for women of color. So can you share with us what your experience has been, and to share any insights, tips, best practices that others can use to help them on their journey?
Yeah. So, like we were just talking about, you can start out kind of on a shoestring budget. It's very difficult to start out on a shoestring budget for a technology product, right? Because not only do you have to invest in creating the device, you want to protect your IP, and then eventually you want to go into larger scale production with a factory that's going to require a lot of down payment and money spent on inventory. So there are many, it's pretty daunting when I first started out about how am I going to fund all of this? And frankly, it makes me quite sad because, my example is one of an incredible amount of privilege, right? Even though I check all the boxes that you just mentioned, I had something which was that friends and family money. My mother gave me some of her retirement money to start this business, and I never would have been able to get it off the ground if it wasn't for that. And so the reason why I say that makes me sad is because I know that there are entrepreneurs that have amazing ideas, just as good as mine or even better, that will never get them off of the ground because of a lack of funding or resources. So that first money that I got in from my mom, I was able to just use that incredibly efficiently in order to build up the company to a point where I was able to entice some other investors to come in, some angel investors, But even with like a new amazing technology, IP granted on the technology, sales on that, and basically building it all up from nothing, it was still incredibly hard to raise money. You know, I think the cannabis industry, like you said, it makes it even more difficult because people in this industry, investors want their money back right away, or they want it back at such a high, interest rate or, investment rate for at the end of the day, however that's structured, right? That you're essentially giving up all of your company. And so thankfully, I was privileged enough to be able to be very strategic and not have to give up a ton of money in the beginning because I was able to, have my mom's money come in. So I was very blessed, in that regard. And in total, raised about $1 million altogether for the business, which is still quite a little bit of money. I mean, there are other companies that I knew that had raised $6 million and never got a product off the ground, and a very similar product to ours, right? And so even doing it on $1 million is a very, very shoestring budget. But it really comes down to just proving the business, statistics. And when I first started out, I actually didn't realize how strong of a business I had in comparison to other folks. And yet it was still very difficult, to raise money. I think it comes from the fact of not being, if you're not in certain circles, right? If you're not in certain networks, just even having access to people that do have money. So I had to become very visible, getting in the angel investment circles, going and pitching anywhere that we could around the product in order to find folks and get some visibility, and bringing on folks that also knew people that had money. And so we were successful in raising money that way, of, kind of having folks champion for us and having a cheerleading squad, right? It's in investing, as you know, very it's kinda like high school, you can have a really great product, but if you're not like the popular kid, in those circles, right, you might be popular in the product, but like there has to be kind of like this, idea of the fact that they're gonna miss out, right? So just learning a little bit more about the strategy around getting investment in. I think a lot of folks, kinda think it's all based on merit, when really at the end of the day, it's based, on other things, as well.
Yes, I agree with that. I think the expression, your network is your net worth, is so true, especially when it comes to trying to raise capital for a startup. It's incredibly difficult, but I admire you so much for your ability to stick with it, to stay positive, and to keep forging through, overcoming every obstacle that was thrown in front of you. It's incredible.
Thank you.
And so, in addition, oh, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
so there was one bit of advice that I wanted to give to founders, especially female founders, underrepresented founders, founders that don't have that network, is just continue to put yourself out there and don't be worried about looking foolish. Just go and connect with people and listen. Some people are gonna turn their noses up at you, but there are definitely in any room that you go in, there's gonna be one or two people that really resonate with your grit, with your ability to come out there. And one example I would love to give is when I was early on in Ardent, I went and I presented for an investment group in Silicon Valley. And I went out there and I was not really prepared, but they invited me to come out. And I went, and I would say like I kind of bombed, I kind of did okay, but I kind of bombed. But even still, with bombing, I still almost made it. I made it to their like second round, and I mean, I remember being on the plane on the way home, just thinking I didn't really do a great job there and feeling a little bit bad about it. But now looking back, the connections and folks that I made there, and also just the fact that, listen, it's okay not to be perfect all the time, but you have to keep going out there and making it happen. Like, just continue to do that. You will find people that are your champions, and sometimes it's in very unlikely places, but you'll never find them if you don't continue to go out there.
Yeah, thank you. That's excellent advice. And for our listeners, I'd love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts in the comments on ways that you've gone about overcoming the obstacles to capital raising. And we'll also share some links to resources. Now, Shanel, in addition to being a mother, an inventor, an attorney, you're also extremely committed to social justice, and you've been very active with a number of different organizations. Boston Bar Association, the Parabola Center, Equal Opportunities Now. So I'd love it if you could share with us some of the advocacy work that you do and how you think about social justice and social equity within the cannabis industry, and what initiatives you really have grabbed onto.
Absolutely. And it's funny, my advocacy and political work, before I got into cannabis or into this, I kind of was thrown into it in a bit. Obviously, I always cared about social causes. I went to a social justice law school, Northeastern. But I was a young mom. I was busy, not really like paying attention to much besides, making sure my life was good for myself and my son. But when things happened with, on the cannabis side, and I got this expertise and I started this business, I really started to see the injustices that existed with respect to how the market was being shaped in Massachusetts and Boston, where I'm from. And so I was one of the few women, one of the few people of color that owned a cannabis business. And all of a sudden, I really found myself kind of at the center of conversations around this issue. And also, like I said, at the same time, seeing medical marijuana come to Massachusetts and zero ownership from any people of color or small businesses when it came to our medical program. And so it became very important to me, and actually surprising to me that I would be able to kind of have this voice in shaping what might happen in cannabis in Massachusetts. And one of the things that was very important was making sure that when this new industry, right, which isn't quite new, right? Cannabis industry exists, but when it was becoming legalized and transferred from kind of a traditional, like underground industry, illicit market into a legalized market, that that there wasn't an erasure of number one, the history of what had happened and the whole reason why cannabis is sold in dispensaries and costs a lot of money, right? Like it's a plant like a tomato, right? It could be readily available, but it's not because it has been criminalized over decades and decades. And there has been a result of that criminalization that has, been borne by communities of color, by poor people, by, folks that, are not in wealthy, elite white neighborhoods, right? And so it was very important to make sure that when that transition happened, that there was some acknowledgement of that fact, right? That there had been harm to our communities over, legalization, and some participation in that new legal industry, and economic participation. So in Boston and Massachusetts, there was a study that was done that showed that like the median, net worth of white families was $200,000, and for Black families, it was $8. And so the
What?
yes, I mean, it's yes, so we can share that report, but that was really
Wow.
yes, and you can see, Massachusetts is actually and Boston is one of the most segregated cities in the country. It's actually more segregated than Birmingham, Alabama. So you can very clearly see where arrests were happening and where enforcement was happening and tie that very clearly to, some of the challenges, right? It becomes a very visible window into some of the disparities that exist in our society, right? And a great opportunity to try to correct some of those. And so, equity in cannabis means to me making sure that there is room for not only big businesses and MSOs, but small independent operators, small farmers, people of color, people who have been arrested by, for cannabis in the past and had that effect on their family. So that was something that we were able to do after pushing for legalization and getting equity provisions within our law that passed in 2016. We formed Equitable Opportunities Now, which is really a policy group and a an advocacy group to help support people who are entering the industry, but even more so to advocate for policies that would create a framework where they could be successful. Because one thing that we've seen is if you and we saw it in Massachusetts, if you create a framework where only the rich and people have access and can have it, that's what will happen. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to get the first nationwide equity program in place in Massachusetts. And so that includes exclusivity licenses for delivery and social consumption, which we still haven't, brought to market yet, but hopefully soon. But also priority for equity applicants, and even more recently, we just got 20% of our taxes back into a social equity fund. So actually, the distribution,
Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
so it's $25 million this first year that is going directly to equity license holders. So that will be distributed. Those awards will go out within the next couple of weeks. So that will be a really amazing support for mostly entrepreneurs who don't have those networks. So 500 or $250,000 coming in is a major boon to these Black and Brown owned businesses and these other small businesses that are also part of the equity program.
Will the funds be available as grants or
Yes.
loans, or how will they be
Yes. So
distributed?
this first round is all grants. So it is free money, and there's a great accountability system as well. So the state has done a really great job of listening, and we were able to do that through legislative action. So that was through a lot of collective work, and again, Eon was a leading voice in that push for this overhaul. So it's not just about getting laws in place. You can get the law in place, but then as you see what works and what doesn't, there often is tweaking that needs to be done. And then at that point, you really have to be advocating at that point and have developed the relationships with the legislature and with the members of, your state House and Senate in order to get them to make and take action. So with our voices all together, not only the first of us that just started out on this and pushed for the legalization, but also now all the entrepreneurs that are part of this opportunity, we have a very strong voice in continuing to make sure that this is a part of the industry that is, absolutely represented. So that's on the mass local side of things, and obviously there's also the federal work that we're doing through Parabola Center too.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that, because I'd love to share with our listeners how they can become more involved in advocacy and if there's an opportunity for them to engage with those organizations
Yes. So
on a national level.
Yes, so Eon, we are always happy to help and support grassroots organizers who are on the ground trying to make a difference in their state when it comes down to it. And we have a great roadmap and game plan about how to make that happen initially, and then how to also ensure that the policy develops, as the law is being implemented. And then, so Shalene Title, who's my bestie, and also we have just been in the trenches now for almost 10 years working for equitable policy. And after she left the commission and I left the advisory board, Shalene started up and asked us to come together and form Parabola Center for Law and Policy. And so we are a federal policy think tank of sorts that is really focused on federal and international policy, focused on people and centered on people. So that is our mission to advocate for policy that is focused on people, not rather than corporations. And really, we are a cohort of lawyers, policy activists and experts, professors, small business owners. And what we do is create and work on a national and international network to share information and strategies. And then we also work on influencing federal policy.
One question that we love to ask all of our guests is, what do you think is the most supercritical factor facing the cannabis industry today?
Well, I would say there are two. Number one, federal legalization. I think that that is how it happens and the flow and the pace. And so, what we're advocating for from federal legalization standard is ensuring that when a federal bill comes out, that it's very clear that states are still allowed to have their own programs, have their own equity programs, so that there's not any conflict with any constitutional issues with respect to how the states have been doing it. And then we're also advocating for interstate commerce to only be open to equity businesses and small businesses, right? So we see equity businesses and small businesses as the core of what should be the cannabis, marketplace. And that while big businesses and MSOs certainly have a place, that they should not be dominating or, strangling out small businesses and equity businesses. And based on data, we know that the only way that that can happen is if there is priority and early access for small businesses and equity businesses. And so I think that how that plays out is super critical to the cannabis industry. And
Definitely.
and the second thing is hemp. Hemp is our hemp is kind of like cannabis's spicy little brother that might act up a little bit, and you love him, right? But he's kind of causing some problems. And so with the hemp and the farm bill, and hemp advocacy, certainly the intent around that with everybody in the beginning was to allow non-intoxicating, cannabinoids to be readily available to anybody who
Right.
needed them. And what it has turned into is a free-for-all, finding any loophole that can be exploited in order to really, create something now that has become an incredible threat against regulated cannabis. And how that is squared and how that is and it's strange because there are some good and there are some bad parts to it, meaning that I think hemp and CBD and even, some of the, what I consider kind of the adulterated cannabinoids have gone a long way to open up the conversation around cannabis and for people to see that
Hmm.
the sky does not fall, even if there's lots of cannabis products all around and readily available. But at the same time, I think in many ways it does undermine the regulation and the strict regulation, and it creates an incredible hypocrisy within the cannabis industry and between entrepreneurs about what their standing is and how they're able to survive and thrive in the industry. And so I'm very, very curious about whether or not that loophole is going to be closed, in the farm bill going forward. And you've certainly seen it's like been used to pit us against each other, quite a bit too. So, and it's really interesting. We're getting to the point in, drug policy and cannabis policy where it's getting very complicated, right? Where before it used to be cannabis legalization good, prohibition bad. And now there are all of these different pieces and
Yeah.
nuances to the industry, to the laws, and what's happening. And it's fascinating from a legal perspective. It can be frustrating from a business perspective, and very, intriguing from a future perspective of, what this industry is going to look like.
Yeah. So what's ahead for Ardent?
So,
What are you looking at
so
next?
we just launched our app for our device, which makes it a Bluetooth. It's a Bluetooth-enabled device, but with our app, you're actually able to sit back and relax and just follow the instructions without having to worry about touching the machine or programming it. And really, it's the idea behind the app was for us to be there with you in the process. And then we've been making a lot of moves in Europe as well too, as legalization has started to catch on overseas, and so bringing the same education and information. And we've always been a global company because we don't touch the plant, right? Just the device
Hmm.
itself. So people are activating whatever they have either from their home grow or the dispensary or their caregiver, wherever they're getting it from.
I love it. So, where can people, wherever they are around the world, find you and Ardent and get onto the website? And how you very graciously have given our listeners a discount for their holiday shopping on the Ardent website
Yes.
to use the code SUPER25 to get 25% off of your
Yeah,
purchases.
so ardentcannabis.com, and it's ARDENT, which obviously it stands for passionate, right? So we're all about the passion for the plant. So ardentcannabis.com. And yes, please come and get your Super 25 discount. We have amazing gift packages for the holiday and gift cards as well. And for policy work, or just to connect with me directly, I'm at Shanel at Ardent Cannabis. I also would encourage people to check out the masseon.com. So it's masseon.com, and that's Eon site. And then the Parabola website as well. So check us out and connect with us. I always love connecting with people, and I get some amazing requests and also insights. So having building community in this industry is really important. And like I mentioned earlier, for entrepreneurs and founders, just building community, even when you're not looking for money, is a great way for, when the time comes when you're ready to already have great relationships with folks. So always happy to connect with folks who are new and also established in the industry, because the more of us who are in here with good hearts and good minds to push this forward, that, I'm all in favor.
Absolutely. And we'll put links in the comments to all of these resources from Shanel. But thank you so much for joining us today on This is Supercritical. Really, it's been amazing catching up with you. And I just admire all the work that you've done. You really just bring your whole self to everything you do. And it's incredible. So thank you.
Likewise, so much,
Please,
Kerry.
please check out the Ardent website. Check out all of Supercritical's podcasts on YouTube or any of your favorite streaming services. Hit us up on our website for a complimentary session. And please join us next month when Sparky and I sit down with Peter Sue, who's the Director of Specialty Banking at Hanover Bank. We're going to do a year-end review of all things cannabis capital. So thanks, Shanel. Everyone have a great day. It's been a tough couple of weeks. With my 2 boys sick, the clock's rolling back an hour for daylight savings, the election results, and the crazy cabinet nominations, I'm just exhausted. But over the weekend, I decided to take a day off to relax. I broke the seal on the holiday movie watching and organized my iPhone camera roll. And that's where I found my inspiration and motivation to snap back into reality. I saw a picture of my older son, who at the time was 10 years old. He was wearing a baseball jersey with the letters MTXE printed on it. The term MTXE, which stands for Mental Toughness Extra Effort, originates from Wichita State University's basketball program during the coaching tenure of Gene Smithson in the 1980s. The philosophy emphasizes perseverance, mental fortitude, and going above and beyond in effort, becoming a mantra for both athletic and personal excellence. The concept continues to inspire both individuals and organizations like Supercritical, way beyond what we're trying to do every day. This resilience is especially important now because it really feels like world is getting much more difficult. The other gem I came across was a video of my younger son, age 5 at the time, recalling what he had learned in kindergarten that day. His words of wisdom to me were, if you're almost there, you can never give up. And it's so true. And I wanted to share his philosophy today because it's been tough going for many of us, and especially for this year in the cannabis industry. And I want to encourage everyone to hang in there, keep going, and let's make 2025 great.